definitely getting back going today. Hold on, let me fix my camera so I'm not looking at this.
Yeah, I kind of let things, on certain things as business, kind of let them go through till today. And I made all the calls and texts and emails, got a hold of pretty much everybody I needed to, all really great positive things, and just set appointments and hit the ground running. And I'm grateful. I'm excited.
Cool. Me too.
Yeah.
I have to warn you that, so my family, we went up to ski, snowboard, whatever it is that we all do. We all do different things. And I normally don't fall, but I fell doing the dumbest thing, trying to put my phone in my pocket, right? So anyway, I didn't feel anything on the day. I felt totally fine. And so that was Saturday. So yesterday was Sunday, no issues. So this morning I woke up and I feel like somebody punched me in my ribs. And I'm just like, I don't know what's wrong with me, right? And I like, if I move funny, I have to wince. So anyway, I told my husband, he's like, you fell and you're old. I'm like, yeah, that's right. So
not hard.
You know what it is. I'm not hurt. It's just like I kind of bruised my side or something over here.
Yeah, I don't even ski anymore. For no other reason that I just have people counting on me. I can't get hurt. I can't be not work. So for me, I don't mind going down on sleds and inner tubes and things like that, but I just don't ski anymore. I'll watch everybody and wait and all that, but I just don't do it because I don't want to do it enough to take the possibility of getting hurt. So I don't,
I hear you. Fortunately, your kids are all grown. My kids are still young though, Brent. So we still got to get out there and do all that stuff.
Well, you could let your husband, and you could be a snow bunny in the lodge and just hang out and have a few cocktails and stay warm,
Yeah, well, you know what? It's interesting now is, the lodges are closed, right? So that was another reason we were.
Oh, I forget. I just keep forgetting. Yeah,
it's totally different now. You can't be a snow bunny. You have to because you'll freeze to death. You're outside the entire time. So
of course.
It's a strange year. So anyway, I just, I have nothing to complain about. I feel blessed and happy that my kids actually still want to hang out, and that, we got up there and got back home safe. So if I wince a little, just know it was earned in a good way. So I figure the best way to start out the new year is talking about listings, right? And let's jump right into the listing contract. So want to start out by saying that always use the Coldwell Banker listing agreement. So CAR has a bunch of different listing agreements, like whether it's vacant land or other categories, but the great thing about our Coldwell Banker listing agreement is it applies to all of them, right? You can use it on vacant land, you can use it on residential income, you can use it on anything. Something happened. There you go. Hi, Sean. How are you? You can use it on anything. Let me just change my screen preview so I can see all of you guys. So always use the Coldwell Banker listing agreement whenever you're taking a listing. No need to learn any other listing agreement. The Coldwell Banker listing agreement is going to be the one you use for everything. And that makes it really cool because it's just a 3-page document. It's got everything you need in there, and we'll go over it. But I do want to point out, even though I said always use this one listing agreement, I have to throw out an exception, right? Because there's always exceptions to everything. So this listing agreement that I'm showing on the screen is only when you are selling your own personal property, right? So I want to make you aware that if you're selling your own house, then you would use this one, which is for solely for sale of sales associates' personal property. I wanted to just bring this to your attention that this is here. It's available. You can pull it up. It's the one that you would use for that purpose. But otherwise, we're going to make sure that we're always using the regular Coldwell Banker listing agreement. Now, our listing agreements have been updated. They've been made basically into what I consider a packet. So they were able to combine some documents all together in our listing agreement. But I just for today want to just cover the basic listing agreement document. That's what I wanted us to discuss here today. So let's jump into this and let's go all the way through and talk it over. Please stop me if you have questions or anything that you want to bring up. These classes are only worth doing live if there's participation. If there's no participation, you might as well be listening to a recording, right? So hopefully we'll have some engagement today. All right, so let's see here. So this is the exclusive authorization and right to sell, basically the listing agreement. Again, we're talking about 3 pages for this document, and we'll just go through and fill it out. So I always use my, I'm not sure why this is jumping around on me. Here we go. I always use my cover sheet whenever I start any document in zip forms, and I'm always going to fill out my cover sheet as best as I can with as much information as possible, so that when I jump into the actual document, I'm going to have most of the information completed in here. So you guys know when you take my classes, I just say it's any town, USA, and I use 123 Main Street for the address. So listing agreement says, in consideration for the exclusive authorization and right to sell, Coldwell Banker Realty or Coldwell Banker agrees to use due diligence to effect the sale of the real estate property. And then that's where you would put the city, so Roseville, Auburn, Lincoln, wherever you're doing business. And then here's where you're going to put in either the property address or the APN number. You want to choose one or the other. The property address or the APN number would go there. And then that's going to be considered the property. Now we want to talk about what's the commission. We want to talk about what's the time frame. How long do we have exclusive authorization and the right to sell? We have exclusive authorization and the right to sell. It starts on a certain date. So what's your start date? I want this listing to start today. And the day your listing starts does not necessarily mean it's going to hit the market. But you want your listing to start so that no one else can come in and take the listing, or there can be no other issues. You want your listing to start, I believe, as soon as possible. I have a lot of agents that will talk to a seller and determine that they're going to get a listing and have the conversation, but not get the listing agreement signed. And I always stress and encourage agents, go ahead and get the listing agreement signed, and we can determine the start date. But let's go ahead and get the agreement signed, because until you have an actual agreement signed and a start date, anything can happen, right? Anything can happen. Now, if you have an agreement signed and you want or decide that you want to let the seller off the hook because there's a good reason, then that's wonderful. But if you don't have it signed and you've done a lot of work, or you just really hoped and prayed that you get the listing and something comes to be, you don't really have any recourse unless you have, again, a signed listing agreement. So for this, we're going to say, let's say our listing is going to start today, and then it's going to end at midnight on a particular date. Now, I'm old school, and we always used to take listings for 6 months. And why 6 months? It's just kind of what I was taught and what I've learned. I've started to see a trend of agents taking listings for 3 months. Even though our market is moving pretty quickly and things are happening fast, I would never encourage you to take a listing for 3 months. It's just not enough time. Anything can happen. The listing can fall out of escrow. You can have to start all over again. Give yourself more time. You want to shoot for 6 months, and then, hey, if you can get a year, then that is fantastic, right? But again, it's going to depend on your property type and the market at the time. Right now, like I said, our properties are moving pretty quickly, so 6 months should be plenty enough time, if the home is priced right, for you to get the property on the market, get it sold, get it closed, and complete your listing contract. So my recommendation, again, would be a 6 month time frame that would go where it says commencing on and ending on. You have to have something in both of those fields in order for you to have a valid listing. You have to have a start date and an end date, or you do not have a valid listing. Now you need to agree on the price. Sometimes agents want to say, well, I don't know what the price is going to be, so I'm going to put in to be determined. That doesn't work. if you don't have a price, oh, we're listing it at 650,000, we're listing it at $1.5 million, whatever your listing price is going to be, it needs to be written in there. Now, yes, you can amend it or change it later. You could up the price, lower the price. But for the initial agreement, in order to have a valid agreement, you definitely need to have an agreed upon price. Give me 1 second. Okay, I want to make sure I'm seeing you guys in case there's anything in the chat. So far, no questions, no disagreements. All right. So then we get to the part where it says the following terms and conditions. And this is when agents like to get creative. And this is when I don't like for you guys to get creative, right? I know that there are places in our business for creativity, and this is not one of them. So I want you to think of this field here where it says on the following terms and conditions. I want you to think of this as limitations to you getting paid. So when you type something in there, I want you to think whatever you're typing in there is a limitation to you getting paid. Some agents like to type in cash or cash to the seller or whatever. None of that is necessary, right? So the agreement has already been written up by Coldwell Banker attorneys in your favor to protect you and make sure that you get paid. But when you get creative and you want to add something in, then you are building in a limitation towards getting paid. Now, sometimes there are limitations towards you getting paid, and you do have to document those limitations. Let me give you an example. Let's say the sellers have a neighbor, and that neighbor has approached them and said, I think I want to buy your house, but I'm not sure. And the sellers are like, well, maybe our neighbors want to buy the property. And if they do want to buy the property, then I don't want to pay you a commission, or I don't want to pay you a full commission. I'm only going to pay you 1% to represent us, or 2% or 3%, whatever that is, if our neighbors, Bill and Sandy, buy the property. So then you could put there as a limitation, if Bill and Sandy buy the property, then your commission would only be X. Sometimes agents will agree that if they represent both sides, then they'll take less. I, again, don't agree with that theory, but I don't get to make all the decisions for you in your business. So that is where you would put any limitations towards you getting paid. But no reason, again, to just get creative and put things like cash or, acceptable terms to the seller. None of that needs to be added on because, again, Coldwell Banker has already drafted the listing agreement in your favor. No need for you to be creative. Any questions or comments on that? Obviously, I feel strongly about that, right? All right, so let's get into how Coldwell Banker has drafted this agreement in your favor. So the first thing we need to do is be clear to the seller that there is no fixed commission. It's not allowed by the law, and that each commission is negotiable between the seller and the broker. So this is where you're going to want to have a really good listing presentation, and you're going to want to be able to articulate your value. I really recommend taking a look at the 12-minute listing presentation. I recommend using Listing Concierge. I recommend understanding what your seller is looking for and what their needs are. Can the following terms and conditions section be left blank? Absolutely. So I'm going back to this section where I said, please don't get creative. That can most definitely be left blank. If there are no following terms and conditions, nothing needs to go there. But you want to be able to articulate your value. And there's other classes that will speak to having a strong presentation and being able to get the most percentage because you do a lot of work, you guys. It really is not easy to close deals, and every dime that you can earn is every dime that you absolutely 100% deserve. And the reason you're with Coldwell Banker is because we have more for your clients so that you can get higher commissions. So go for it, right? You do not have to compete as a discount agent. You have everything at your fingertips to get the most. All right, my sermon is over. I'll get back to the nuts and bolts. So here's where you're going to put the total commission for both sides, right? So you're going to put because the way it works is as the selling brokerage, we collect, in theory, the total commissions. So the 6% or the 5.5% or the 5%. Hopefully you won't go any less than that. I really believe you guys can all get 6%. We're going to collect the full 6%, and then we're going to pay the brokerage that brings the buyer whatever percentage we agree to pay them, and that's coming up later. So here's where the total commissions that the seller's going to pay are going to go on this line. So hopefully 6. And that's where we'll put it. If there's a flat fee, let's say for instance you agreed we're not going to pay a percentage, I'm going to do a flat fee. I almost never see that. You know, sometimes on land you might want to consider doing a flat fee, but most of the time, I'd say 99.9% of the time, we're dealing with a percentage. Oh, the other time that I see a flat fee is on a mobile home or some real low dollar amount property where the percentage would not even be worth the gas price to drive out to the property. All right, we have a question that says, can we put in per seller's instructions, cannot sell to Bill and Sandy? Okay, good question, Charles. So here's the problem. If you say Bill and Sandy as a buyer, then we don't need to put that in there because the seller is going to make the decision of which offer they take, right? So Bill and Sandy as buyers, right? Just customers, consumers, the seller will decide who they take an offer from. If Bill and Sandy are agents, I've had this happen where they say, you know what, in this particular situation, his ex-wife was an agent. And he said, I do not want my ex-wife to be able to sell my property. So he wanted us to exclude his ex-wife from being able to sell the property. Well, the rule is if you exclude one agent from a brokerage, you must exclude the entire brokerage. So for instance, if they didn't like David, that would mean no one from Coldwell Banker would be able to write an offer for that property. So that's the way that has to go. But in terms of excluding a particular buyer, we'd have to be very careful. If the sellers did want to say something like that, they'd be looking at possibly a fair housing issue or some other discriminatory complaint, possible discriminatory complaint. So what the sellers would need to do is just decide not to take an offer from anybody that they did not want to sell to. All right, jumping back in. So how do we get paid? What do we need to do in order to get the commission percentage that we just agreed to, or the flat fee? So there's 4 different things that they have down here. So either a ready, willing, and able buyer for the property is procured, or seller or anyone else on the listed terms or any other terms agreeable to the seller during the term. So that here says any terms agreeable to the seller, right? So that means as long as the seller accepts the offer, we get paid. Yay! So willing and able buyer also means that if somebody brings us an offer and it's a full price offer with no contingencies, then we've brought a willing and able buyer, a buyer who's willing, they've made an offer, and they're able, they are writing the offer and it's non-contingent. We should get our commission. If the property is sold, exchanged, or optioned by Coldwell Banker or the seller or anyone else during the term of the agreement. So we have the listing, the seller finds their own buyer and they sell it to their own buyer, we still get paid our commission because we have the listing. And that is the entire point of having a listing agreement, right? Is that we get paid if the property sells. If the property is withdrawn from the market by the seller without written approval by Coldwell Banker, or the seller prevents performance of our duties. Let's say they never let us show the property, right? They don't review any offers, then we could potentially be paid for that if they are prohibiting us from being able to sell the property. Or if within 90 days after the termination of this agreement, so this is important, you guys, 90 days after the termination of this agreement, if the seller enters into an agreement to sell the property to any buyer to whom Coldwell Banker or cooperating broker has introduced the property prior to the termination of this agreement and whose name is submitted in writing the seller and date of termination agreement within 10 days. Okay. All that says that if the listing expires, if the listing cancels, if the listing is withdrawn within 90 days from the date that that happens, anybody who saw the property during our listing term, if we submit a list, right? So the day that we, or prior to us, the listing expiring, so prior to the listing expiring, we need to submit a list and saying, these are all the people that we gave access to the property that potentially could have seen the property because of us. If anybody on that list comes back within that 90-day period and purchases the property, even if it's listed with another company, then we still get paid. So let's talk about that a little bit and let's flush that out. Let's say that happened. I show the property to a buyer and they aren't ready to buy now, or perhaps they write a low offer and my listing cancels and they come back 2 weeks later and they write a full price offer. The seller accepts it and gets into contract with that person. If I had provided that buyer's name on a list to my seller prior to the expiration, then the seller would owe me the full commission on that buyer if they accepted an offer. What's supposed to happen is if my listing expires and I provide a list to my seller, when my seller goes to relist with his new brokerage, he should share that list with the new brokerage and say, all of these people have to be excluded from our listing agreement, because if one of these people ends up buying the property, then I'm going to owe a commission to my previous brokerage, right? So that would be another thing that could go up here on the following terms and conditions. See attached list, all of these buyers are excluded from the agreement, right? So if any of these people from the list end up closing, then I am not going to pay you a commission. Nicole?
Yes, so you would keep track of all of the buyers that have seen the house and provide that contact list, I guess just the names, to the seller just prior to the expiration. Do I understand correctly?
Yes, that is correct. It's easier said than done. There's a lot that goes into it. So some agents will pull their MLS key box, the folks who have been in the property, but that's only going to tell you the agents that have seen the property. So then you'd have to reach out to those agents and you'd have to call them and you'd have to say, hey, I know that you showed the property on X date. Can you give me the name of the buyer that you showed the property to? You could potentially put on the list, the client showed by X agent on this date. But then it's still harder for you to track. How do you know who that person is if they actually go into contract with that person?
So I guess that would be one good thing about the COVID form, since the buyer names are on there.
I was just going to say that. Yes, that is one good thing about the COVID forms. You have a list of all the buyers that have entered the property. You should be saving all those. And if your listing expires, those are the names that you have on there. If you suspect that you're going to be in a listing, like let's say COVID goes away, our prayers finally get answered and we no longer have to do the COVID forms. One of the things you could do is require everybody to sign in, or require that they send a pre-approval letter ahead of time. And that would be a way to keep track of who's entered the property and who hasn't entered the property. Sean, did you have a question? Okay. So one thing that I've also run across is if do you want to give your client list to your competing broker, right? So you're turning that client list of all the people who have seen the property over to the seller, who is then going to turn it over to their agent, right? So I've had some people be concerned about that. I don't want to give because maybe I brought in some of my own clients to see the property, and now I'm giving my own clients over as their names. And in that case, you could put instead of saying Nicole Spencer, you can say N Spencer or Nicole S, right? So those are ways that you could get around that. So I have a lot of fun in this business coming up with different solutions for different crazy things that have happened. So if anything crazy ever happens to you, talk to me about it, because we'll probably come up with some creative solution to figure it out. Okay, let's see. April says, this is only if the property sells to that person in that 90-day period. You are correct. Only if the property sells to that person in the 90-day period, right? After the 90-day period, you're AO, right? You're not involved. Your chances are up. And doesn't seem like you can hear my question. Oh, I couldn't hear you. Is this only for those who actually see the property? Yes, for those who actually see the property. And so this is if the listing is canceled or withdrawn and it's relisted with another company, and you want to get paid because your marketing brought that buyer to the property, even though the listing was canceled or withdrawn prior to it being put together. But you were the catalyst for that buyer coming to see the home. All right, let's move on from that, because that's kind of rare. All right, now we're talking about commission payments to the cooperating brokerage. So we initially talked about the full amount, the 6% coming to Coldwell Banker, and now we're talking about the portion that we're going to pay to the brokerage that brings the buyer. So it says, in the event a cooperating broker represents the buyer, seller and Coldwell Banker agree that the cooperating broker shall receive a commission of. And I will tell you guys, many of our agents get 6% and still do 2.5% to that cooperating broker. And that means that they keep, come on, compute in your head, they keep 3.5%. And that's how a lot of our agents are making more money on their listings, because they're keeping 3.5% and doing the standard 2.5% to the buyer. We're not going to have a morality conversation about whether that's good or bad. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that that's a possibility. You, as long as the seller, you can sell your value and the seller agrees to it, what you offer the buyer is up to you. Now, obviously, different markets are going to require different things. If we get into a situation where it's really difficult to find a buyer, you might find yourself offering more to the buyer's agent than you actually take, or a bonus, or some other means of bringing in a buyer. But in our current market, how things have been for quite some time, you're going to have more buyers than properties. And so under those circumstances, agents have found that it's okay to offer 2.5% to the buyer's broker and keep 3.5% for themselves. Not something that you have to do, but it is something that does happen. It's irrevocable. The real estate commission for services rendered shall be irrevocable, assigned in cash from escrow. So that means that you're going to get paid out of escrow. The money goes straight out of escrow, taken from the seller's proceeds before the seller even gets paid. So nothing that you have to go to their house, knock on the door, and ask for your cash. The property shall be offered in compliance with all applicable federal, state, and local anti-discrimination laws. So all the equal, fair housing rules, you have to follow all of those rules. The seller agrees to fully and accurately complete the real estate transfer disclosure statement. There are a few sellers that are exempt, but for the most part, they're going to need to complete the real estate transfer disclosure statement and the supplemental disclosure form and or disclosures in writing, any and all material facts known to the seller. So we're already getting their agreement up front that they're going to complete the required disclosures. Seller agrees to indemnify Coldwell Banker from all claims, demands, expenses, judgments relating to or arising from any incorrect or incomplete information supplied by the seller to Coldwell Banker or any third party, or from any material fact known to the seller concerning the property which the seller fails to disclose in writing. So here's where your legal team has put together a statement to protect you if the seller omits or does not give you the information needed. They are indemnifying you up front. You have a place here where you can have them opt in for seller coverage for the home protection plan. As you guys know, seller coverage is available, and if they get seller's coverage, it's like something like $1 a day for your listing. So for a total of like maybe $60, you might be able to cover a broken water heater or have other repairs done that would be covered under the seller's coverage. It's also a good marketing tool to get seller's coverage. Some agents will say, hey, I'll cover the seller's coverage, and it's part of their value proposition to the seller. Like for $60, they're giving the seller some peace of mind. Will there be a sign? Are we going to have a sign installed or not? I will tell you guys that if you run into a seller who does not want a sign, I would very much question, do they really want to sell? Right? Anybody who is not going to do everything necessary to expose the property is probably not a real seller. You guys know I grew up in a real estate household, and my dad used to always say, buyers who buy and do everything necessary to make that happen. Sellers who sell and do everything necessary to make that happen. So if your seller's putting up roadblocks on you with things like, I don't want a sign in front of my house, I don't want people to know I'm selling my house, I would be very, very concerned. But, you know, there are certain situations where perhaps it does not make sense to have a for sale sign, but it would definitely make the light bulb go off for me. So you check the box, hopefully yes, we're putting up a for sale sign. All right, so now we're into the section that talks about the multiple listing service. So the seller is going to authorize Coldwell Banker to submit the property to the MLS service. Coldwell Banker is a member, right? So the MLS requires us as members that if we get a listing, that we have to immediately post that listing on the MLS. And then we're going to get into how we can modify that responsibility or what we need to do to stay compliant if the property is not immediately going on the market. MLS is going to disseminate the information to participants of the MLS. So it's going to get syndicated out of the MLS. Any changes, all of that, they're authorizing us right now to allow that to happen and to go to the MLS. The seller can elect to have the property marketed in the MLS as coming soon where permitted. Okay, so this is kind of a sticky situation, though you really want to make sure you understand all the ins and outs of the coming soon process. The seller acknowledges that during the coming soon period, the property will be exclusively advertised and promoted in the MLS. It may not be shown and will automatically become active in the MLS upon the expiration of the agreed upon number of days at the time which the property will be advertised, promoted in accordance with this agreement. So if the property is in a coming soon status, the MLS considers that marketing. And even though it's not active in the MLS and being syndicated to buyers, it is still considered being marketed. And so you will have days on market whenever you have a coming soon listing. So if you put the listing in coming soon status, okay, we're going on the market in 2 weeks. When your listing hits the market, it's going to be 2 weeks old. You are not going to have 0 days on market. You're going to have 14 days on market. So I'm not a big fan of using the coming soon. I just don't think it gives you enough bang for your buck to offset the fact that your listing is going to come on the market with days on market. As you guys know, the days on market drive how a buyer is going to basically bid for the property. The fewer days the property has been on market, the higher the buyer is going to make their offer in order to get the property. The longer the property's been on the market, the lower the buyer is usually going to make their offer in order to be able to get the home. So you have to think about that when your seller asks for a coming soon sign. They don't necessarily understand that process, so it's important that we understand it and we can explain that to them. But we do need time from when we actually take the listing and we get an agreement from the seller that we are going to market their property to the time that it hits the market. And that's where we use the on-market date in MLS. This is really important, right? Your on market date, you take your listing, I go meet with my seller. We agree that I'm going to get 6%. I'm going to pay whatever to the buyer side. We're going on the market at 700,000, but I'm not ready to hit the market tomorrow. I need photographs. I want to make flyers. I want to make brochures. I want to send out emails. I want to maybe even set up an open house. I want to come up with my marketing plan. You know, I want to utilize listing concierge. I need 5 to 7 days before I'm ready to hit the MLS with my property. And so although my listing starts today, I'm not going to go active on the MLS until whatever date that would be. So that's where you would check this box and you would put that active date here. I'm sorry, it won't let me highlight. You would put that active date here. So if today's January 5th, I think, maybe 5th or 4th or something, and then I'm going to go active on the MLS January 10th, and I put that date. So then when I'm entering my listing in the MLS, I'm going to put an on-market date of January 10th. That way MLS knows that I've taken the listing today, but I'm not going live on the market until January 10th. If you get that part mixed up or you do it wrong, they are definitely going to send you a compliance notice and try to give you a fine for that. So please, please reach out to me. If you're doing your first listing, let's make sure that we're getting it right so that we can avoid you getting the nasty gram from the MLS. If you were going to do the coming soon, you would check this second box and say that you're going to have the coming soon status for however many days. And then when you hit the market, as you know, you will come on with days on market. If the seller wants to keep the listing completely off MLS entirely or for a period of time, then they would check this box and they would have to submit a waiver saying that the seller does not want the property advertised on MLS either right now or for a period of time. I'm not going to get too much into the internet advertising, but if the seller did not want the property to be on the internet, they would check this box and it would allow them to limit internet access to the property. Again, I would seriously question if a seller wants to sell their home and they don't want it advertised on the internet, what are they trying to do, right? Why would they limit the number of people who can see the property, especially right now when that is how the majority of people find out about homes that are available? So sometimes sellers will say, hey, you know, I want you to take my listing, but I want you to take it as a pocket listing. I don't want it to go on the MLS. I always question why. Do you want to sell the house or do you not want to sell the house? You know, like if you want to sell the house, you want to get as many eyes on the property as possible. You want it to go on without any limitations. Obviously, there are some situations, you know, I had one where the seller was a cop and he was worried that, you know, he'd be in danger by opening his home. You know, there's always one-offs, but for the most part, you want to have as many buyers be able to go through the property. In terms of access, the seller is authorizing reasonable access to the property to allow Coldwell Banker to market the property. The lockbox, open houses, and general showings will be permitted access to the premises by participants of the MLS listing service, potential buyers, inspectors, and other parties, some of whom may take videos and photographs of the exterior and the interior of the property. So we're already getting permission up front in our agreement that some people may be taking photos of the property. It could be a buyer who's just wanting to, you know, share that photo with a spouse or a loved one, or it could be an inspector who's taking pictures to document what things they are going to put on their inspection. It could be the appraiser, but we're just kind of getting the seller's permission right now that folks may be coming through the property and they may be taking photos. Interior and exterior. There is some risk in using these procedures, and the seller should take reasonable steps to safeguard their valuables at the property. Seller is advised to verify the existence of insurance or obtain appropriate insurance through his or her own insurance agent to protect the seller's personal property, real property, and personal financial interests while the property is being marketed. Coldwell Banker does not maintain insurance to protect the seller's interests. Seller understands and agrees that Coldwell Banker is not responsible for any losses, damages, claims, blah, blah. All right. And then the lockbox. This is another one, right? There are some weird times where a lockbox doesn't make sense, but again, a seller who's really trying to sell their house, they're going to want to have a lockbox on the property so people can have access and get in. They want to make their house accessible. Seller agrees to use a lockbox and waives and releases Coldwell Banker, the multiple listing service, and the board of realtors from any loss or responsibility therefore. If the property is not seller occupied, so the seller doesn't live there, the seller shall be responsible for obtaining written permission from any and all occupants for use of the lockbox. So it's up to the seller to get permission from their tenant. Agency. Seller acknowledges that the seller has received the agency disclosure. Remember that the 2 agency forms always go out before we do anything, list or write an offer. So we've got our agency disclosure and our possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, which we'll touch on next week. Attorney's fees, if there's any action in the agreement relating to arising, they are responsible for their own legal fees and costs. Manager's approval. I need to sign these listing agreements, and we're letting the seller know up front that if you guys go crazy and agree to something insane and then come back and tell me, I might be like, we can't do that. That hardly ever happens. But if you got a crazy situation before you go in, just give me a heads up and let's talk about it. I never want to put you in a situation where you've told your client you'll do something and then here I am saying, no, that's not going to happen. So it's better if we have communication up front. All right. Seller authority. Seller warrants that the seller is the owner of the property, has the authority to manage. He warrants that this agreement shall be binding upon the seller and the seller's successor and assigns to the extent permitted by law. So the seller is saying they can actually be the ones to do this, right? They are the actual owners. Speaking of who is the actual owner and who is able to sign, we've got this whole section on page 3, which is the designation of the seller's capacity. So this is for our sellers who are either in a trust, an LLC, or they have a power of attorney, right? So it's built into the listing agreement right here. There's also a conservatorship one. So let's talk about how this will work. If any of the individuals signing the listing agreement are acting on behalf of the seller, that individual must deliver to the broker proof of their authority to act on behalf of the designated seller within 3 days. So let's say I am, the property is in a trust. I need to provide the trust agreement, right, to the agent to show that I have the authority to sign as the trustee or the executor or whatever my situation is. We need to see that and we need to know that they have the authority to act. So what we'll do here is the title of the property is held in a trust. This is going to be where you put the name of the trust. So this is the Talisa Belam Living Trust is what I'm going to put right here, the name of the trust. And then the person who's going to actually sign down here is going to be the trustee. So this is where I would sign as the trustee, Talisa Belam, right? And so it goes the same for whether it's a trust or attorney in fact or guardianship or an LLC. You put the name of the entity and then the person actually who is able to sign. And this gives that permission for the designation on the seller capacity. So you don't need to go and do the additional what's the RCSD when you're taking a listing if you're using the Coldwell Banker listing agreement. You will have to use the RCSD for the purchase agreement, but not for the listing agreement because it's already built into our listing agreement.
Lisa?
Yes.
So if I'm the seller and I have a trust, Nicole Spencer Trust dated March 20th, 2010, I only have to put Nicole Spencer in that blue line?
Down here. But up here, you're putting the name of the trust.
I'm not seeing anything move.
Hmm?
All I see is a blue line. So are you showing something up here, down there?
You're not looking at the actual document?
Well, I'm looking at the document, but I don't see your cursor moving.
Do you see that? No?
No. Maybe my internet is off. Okay, now I see you.
Okay, so where that blue line is where you'll put the name of the trust, and then it says the property is held in the trust identified as the Nicole Spencer Trust, and the individual signing the transaction documents is the trustee or the substituted trustee of that trust. So it's already giving you permission or the designation by filling that in, so that when you come down here to where it actually says the seller, now all you have to put in is Nicole Spencer.
Oh, so you don't have to put up at the top, Nicole Spencer Trust, March 10th, 2010, or whatever, because usually the date is associated with it.
You have to put whatever the name of the trust is, right? So whatever trust documents, whatever that says, you'll put down the name of the trust. And then at the bottom, you'll put the person who's authorized to sign.
Thank you.
Because all the trusts are kind of listed differently, you know, like, you know, whether it's a living trust or sometimes they're quick short, sometimes they're 2 pages long in the title. I'm exaggerating, but, and that's where we want to see ideally the trust documents so that we can match it up and we can see the trust documents. This is the name of the trust and this is the person who has the authority to sign, and they need to match. So that is super cool. I love that being built into the listing agreement. And then here's where the seller will complete the rest of their information. And then here's where you will sign. Sorry, it's getting loud in my house. And you can, when you turn this document in, it will be sent to me and I will sign it. Or some agents send it to me directly via DocuSign because they want to get my signature ahead of time, and I'm happy to sign it that way as well. Here's where your California license number will go. This is going to be your name. And again, when it gets sent to me, I will sign it so that we have a complete signed listing agreement. When you meet with the seller to take the listing, you don't have to have my signature on there. I can sign it within 72 hours after you have taken the listing. Any questions? We have completed the entire listing agreement. I love the fact that it's so short and sweet and has all the protection that you need in there without a bunch of extra stuff. So if you think about the RPA being like 14 pages, the listing agreement is really only 2 pages, because this third page, the only thing that's really on there besides the signatures is the designation. So if you're not in a trust or a conservatorship or an LLC, it's practically just 2 pages. Short, sweet, to the point, protects you. Did I put you guys to sleep? Well, that's what I have.
That was good.
No, it was really helpful. Thank you.
So now everyone on the call, please go out and get 2 listings between now and Wednesday, and then meet me back here. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the more comfortable you feel about these documents, the easier it'll be for you to go out and get listings. I do believe kind of like in intentional doing stuff. If you want more listings, I would recommend fill out a listing agreement, right? Look at the house that you think you want to list, you know, and fill it out. Practice this stuff, practice writing listing agreements, because I do believe that when you do stuff like that, it kind of like puts that energy out into the universe, and then you end up actually starting to write listing agreements. So challenge yourself to write 2 a week. Challenge yourself to write 1 a day. The more you write them, the better you'll get, the more listings you'll take. Right? Right.
Thank you.
All right, you guys. I'll see you next week. We'll talk more about the agency disclosures. We'll jump into the agency disclosures and the other forms that are in the packet of the listing agreement.
Talisa, I have a quick question if you don't mind.
Sure.
Can you go back to multiple listing service?
Yes.
And you were talking about that first box, and if taking a listing and the property is going up for sale in the future, then we would put the future date on that blank line. But I know, but then we would need to also talk with you. Is that right?
So the on market date means that you're you're taking the listing today, but you need a few days to get the marketing together. And so you're just going to say the day that you want it to be active in the MLS. You don't have to talk to me about that. I just want to make sure you do it right. So if you just have any questions on how to enter it into the MLS to make sure that you don't get a violation, you can reach out to me and I'll help you with it. But you don't need my permission or approval or anything to get that done. You just want to make sure that the date here matches the on-market date when you enter it into the MLS.
Okay, I got you. Okay, thank you.
Hey, Happy New Year. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Business. Talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.
There's new messages. Someone might need to ask you a question.
No, she said, Happy New Year. Thank you. Great. Super week.
Yeah, those are questions you didn't answer.
How do I answer thank you?
You say, I don't know, you're welcome.
How about I do this? All right.